Aloha mai kako, aloha. All right. Welcome everyone to the Grassroot Institute on the island of Maui, and I just want to say what a beautiful day this is. We are here on Maui, Maui no Ka'oi, at the beautiful Maui Country Club on July 31st, 2018, and we're going to talk about ways in which we can save and improve and sustain our employee retirement system, and we'll get into that in just a moment. I'm Keli'i Akina, president of the Grassroot Institute. Just delighted to be with you. I'll be introducing our lead researcher a little later on to give you some research that we have just broken nationally and are doing that today. But first, a word of disclaimer. Although I'm a state official, a trustee at large in the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, I'm here today in my private capacity, so nothing I say represents any agency or the state government. And with that said, we all care about the employee retirement system. Why are we releasing this national research here on the island of Maui today? Probably because Maui, as we say, is no Ka'oi. Maui is special. It's a place where many things happen. Maui is big enough to have the problems the whole state has, but small enough to solve them in creative ways. One of the problems we have here is inter-island transport between 3 islands here in Maui County. Another problem is every problem of the state ERS is a problem of the Maui County ERS as well. But Maui's also small enough to come up with some great solutions, and that's what we try to help Maui to do at the Grassroot Institute. Just a word about Grassroot Institute. Where do we come from in terms of our point of view? We are an independent think tank. We look forward to looking into our state's problems with the economy and government and coming up with some solutions. We, by design, maintain our independence by taking no funding from the government at the city, the county, or federal level. We take no money from the military or from the federal or from the university. We take no money from political parties, and we take no clients. Instead, what we do is find best practice research. We scour the nation for places that have solved problems that Hawaii has. In fact, today, we actually are going to present to you research that comes from the only study performed by Grassroot Institute that looks into the employee retirement systems of every single one of the 50 states across the nation. And with that, I think it's no secret that we have a problem with our ERS. The good news is that steps are being taken to preserve the sustainability of it, but the bad news is we could have a change in the economy that could create a perfect storm that could hurt us. I think one of the things we have to recognize, and Grassroot pointed this out several years ago, is we have a huge amount of unfunded liability in our state ERS. Currently, our employee retirement system, the public pension portion, has a $12.9 billion unfunded liability debt. That means we owe our workers $12.9 billion that is not in the system at all. At the same time, if we look at the state employee health system for retirees, other OPEB, we find that it's about $13 billion in debt also. So before we can even pay out benefits to our wonderful state and county workers, we're in about $26 billion of debt, one of the highest rates in the nation. The other thing to keep in mind is that the system for the ERS is actually half full. We are only 54% funded, and that creates a problem. It's not a problem if we have perfect weather economically for the next 100 years. It is a problem if we don't have perfect weather economically. As I mentioned, the state is taking measures to pay off the debt over a period of decades. But what we have to recognize is that this is a long-term problem. Why did we end up in this position? Several years ago, Grassroot Institute was helpful in publicizing the fact that we have high levels of unfunded liability. There was a huge amount of denial on the part of government at that time. But have you noticed virtually everybody in government and the media agrees that we have unfunded liabilities now? Haven't you noticed that shift? We've been part of bringing that shift around. How do we end up in this situation? Well, first of all, there's a historical political reason. And that is that after the dot-com crisis, our state legislature allowed a skimming off of the funds of the employee retirement system. They treated it like a rainy day fund. The only problem is they created a stormy day for the system. But the problem is much worse than that. It's systemic. Even if we fill up the hole that we made, we are creating a hole going forward because we have a program called a defined benefit program. Now, you'll see later on when we present, there's nothing wrong with a defined benefit program. unless it's on the extreme, unless it makes promises at the front end without discussing how we pay for those promises. And that's our problem. Detroit in 2013 found out what happens to a defined benefit program when the economy goes south, and their system collapsed, leaving many state workers, county workers without any coverage. Now, if we take a look at our pension system, we also realize we're the 6th worst funded in the nation, and that puts us in a precarious situation. Other problems have to do with the way workers work today. We have very little portability. It's hard to take your funds out of the state system and then go to another job, which is especially hard for millennials who don't work for long periods of time at a single job. In addition to that, new people coming into the system have to wait for 10 years to get vested. These are challenges that are affecting the quality of our state worker base. Well, the bottom line is we need to do something. We're not here to complain today. We're here to actually present some research that shows what has happened across the nation to systems that have actually been making headway. We're not presenting to the state a silver bullet. We've already worked very closely with staff of the employee retirement system in vetting our work, and we're so glad that they were open and cooperative. Instead, we're going to present a menu of 5 options for potential plans that our state policymakers can adopt. And they cover the entire range from defined benefit to defined contribution. In addition to that, a solution is one which offers employees greater benefits with new plans such as lower vetting and portability. Our solution also suggests that we find a way to calibrate the money it costs at the front end with the benefits we pay on the tail end. And finally, and I'll just give you this as the last piece of our recommendation, we've looked at the ERS system itself and had many conversations with Tom Williams, the head of the ERS system. And we'd like to highlight a need for reorganizing the way it's managed. Right now, very little attention is given to the portfolio management of the ERS, but fundamentally, the ERS is an investment portfolio. According to Mr. Williams, 65 to 70% of all that is paid out of the ERS comes from their investment revenues. That's great. We'd like to help him and his group out by finding a way to increase the number of personnel in ERS that actually are dedicated to working on the portfolio itself. And that would be a great boon to the whole state. With that said, I'm very pleased to present to you the lead of our research team, who is our Vice President of Research, worked very hard with our team members here in Hawaii and our virtual members across the nation in order to present how to resolve Hawaii's public pension debt crisis, a national report going out today. Please welcome up Vice President of Research for the Grassroot Institute, Mr. Joe Kent. Joe? Go ahead.
Thank you, Keli'i. Yes, my name is Joe Kent, and I'm the Vice President of Research at the Grassroot Institute of Hawaii. And I was actually also a teacher here on Maui, a public school teacher. I taught at King Kamehameha III Elementary School in Lahaina. And so that means that I'm also a member of the public pension system. And I kept hearing about this unfunded liability problem, and I wanted to look into it. And so I did. And the report we're releasing today looks at best practices from across the nation to help resolve our public pension debt problem, which has grown to, as Keli'i said, $12.9 billion in unfunded liabilities. I know there's a lot of experts here in the room, but I want to make sure that we all understand the words that we're talking about. What does unfunded liabilities mean? My girlfriend said, don't go forward with that speech without explaining what the word unfunded liabilities means. So unfunded liabilities, it refers to money that should be in the fund, that's not in the fund, and it should be in the fund in order to make good on the promises to public employees. But the fact that it's not in the fund makes it harder to make good on those promises, and so taxpayers have to keep bailing the fund out every year. So let's look at the fund. So this is the Employee Retirement System Fund, and you can see that there's $15.7 billion that are in the fund currently. That's money, that's assets to the fund. Now we're missing $12.9 billion, so that means we're half funded. We're 54% funded right now. And that makes it harder to make good on the promises. But let's say we were 100% funded. Let's say we had all $28 billion that needs to be in the fund. Well, then taxpayers wouldn't have to keep bailing the fund out, and we could just pay public workers off the interest gained every year off the top. So it'd be kind of like a money tree. Employees would have to still contribute, but taxpayers wouldn't have to keep bailing it out. But as such, we are underfunded, 54% again, and that 54% puts us at, as Keli'i said, one of the worst funded plans in the nation. We're actually 44th worst funded here. And I don't know if you can't read this, but here's Minnesota, here's Pennsylvania, Hawaii, Colorado, Connecticut, Illinois, Kentucky, and New Jersey. So we're in with that mix right now. So where did all this unfunded liabilities come from? How did we get this bad? Dr. Akina mentioned that for many years, for about 37 years, lawmakers would skim off the top of the investment earnings from the fund. So if the fund made more money than they thought they were going to make, lawmakers would skim that off the top as a practice, and that worked for a while up until the dot-com crash. When the crash happened in 2001, that money wasn't there, and that set off the unfunded liability problem, and it kept growing and growing and growing up to $12.9 billion today. So the question is the ERS worried about that debt? Is the employee retirement system, are they staying up at night thinking about this? And the answer is yes, they do think about it a lot, and in fact they implemented many reforms to help ease off the debt. But those reforms often, they seem to always involve more taxpayer contributions to the fund. And so last year, they required taxpayers to pay more and more into the fund every year to bail the fund out. And because of that, the projection that they show, it actually reduces the unfunded liability over time until the year 2043, when the ERS predicts that the unfunded liabilities will be completely solved. So actually we'll be overfunded in the year 2044. So you have that to look forward to. And if you ask anyone in the ERS about the crisis, are we in a crisis? They will say that it is not a crisis because we've solved the problem, right? This isn't a crisis. This is solving the problem, except for the small fact that if we get less than the returns that they're expecting. See, this is based on a 7% assumed rate of investment return in the stock market. If we get less than that, let's say we get 5% return, then the unfunded liabilities looks like this. And it goes up, and it never ends. This is according to the ERS itself. This is the ERS's own numbers. They submit two sets of numbers, one to the legislature, and that looked like this. And then the public numbers are the ones that this is more of the public numbers. But the legislature gets this report, and they even do a report to show what happens if there was a big stock market crash next year. So let's say the fund tanked negative 20% next year, and then it was in the doldrums, 5% for years going forward. Then it would look like this. The unfunded liabilities would rise to, what is that, $40 billion by the year 2047. So that is what we mean when we talk about the crisis, is the risk that we're taking on if the stock market investments don't perform as well. Okay, hold on here. And those projections are still based on the solution that the ERS came up with, which is to require taxpayers to keep putting more and more money in the fund. And so how much money are we putting in? Well, last year we put in $730 million statewide into the fund. When you look at ERS documents, they will say this is the employer paying the money. But actually, who is the employer? The employer is the taxpayer. So really, it should say taxpayer contributions. And this year, we're making $780 million of taxpayer contribution, and that next year it's going up past $800 million. Pretty soon, it'll surpass $1 billion every year that we have to come up with to try to catch up to the debt. And that also has an impact on the Maui County budget. Maui County is paying $30 million. Well, this year it was 33, and next year it's going to be 36, and it's just going to keep growing and growing. And that is money that could be used for other things. This is a pie chart of the Maui County operating budget, and you can see 6% of the budget is being used for those catch-up payments on the debt. And like I said, that could be used for homelessness or parks or environmental, or it could just be given back to the taxpayer too, but because that is real money. So this is a big problem, and that's why we wanted to look at best practices from across the nation. What are other states doing? Right, there's 50 states. We can learn from them. And one best practice is to change or alter or offer different benefits for new employees and for current members. Instead of just always asking taxpayers to bail out the fund, you can actually ask current and new employees to have different types of plans. And so that is a best practice. But the problem is every time someone talks about reform in Hawaii, the conversation gets shut down. And it gets shut down by people who rightly say that we can't do this in Hawaii. There's a constitutional provision which says that all accrued benefits from the employee's retirement system shall not be diminished or impaired. And so this is a big hurdle for anyone trying to reform the system, is you can't touch anything that has been earned by current workers. So I wanted to check on this. I wanted to look deeper into this issue, and I went to the state archives on Oahu, and it's just a big library. You go down there, it's kind of like you feel like a rat in a maze, and I went and dug up the Hawaii Constitutional Convention debates of 1950 when this provision was put into the Constitution. And I found that they actually clarified this point. They actually said that you can't change benefits for current workers for previous work, but you can change benefits for current workers for their work moving forward. So if I were an employee, let's say I worked for the system for 20 years, you can't touch my 20 years that I worked for you, but every future year that I work for you, they clarified in those debates that you can. Here it says, the legislature, it should be noted that the above provision, that's referring to that provision I showed you, it says the legislature could reduce benefits as to new entrants in the system or as to persons already in the system insofar as their future services were concerned. So this is a big deal because it means that we can, in Hawaii, maybe we can utilize one of the big best practices, which is to change things for current workers for years going forward. And that would really help us pay down the unfunded liabilities and mitigate against risk in the future. So this opens us up to a world of different plans and ideas and mechanisms that we can try. And so what are those plans? Well, first let's look at Hawaii's plan. How does Hawaii's pension plan work? Well, Hawaii has a defined benefit plan, And that benefit is given out to employees based on how many years of service they worked and how high their pay was and some other factors. So here's an example. In Hawaii, let's say that we have an employee that makes $69,000 as a salary in their last few years of working. And let's say they work for 20 years. They get a 2% multiplier from the benefit plan. And so they would get a $27,000 annual pension. And that is, by the way, $27,000 is actually the average pension that most people get in Hawaii's system. Okay, sounds pretty good. But the system is susceptible to pension spiking, as Keli'i mentioned. So, for example, let's say we have someone making $68,000. And these numbers are real, actually. These are numbers from a Maui County police officer. We're not going to name who that was because we weren't given that name. But the salary was $68,000. They got $52,000 in overtime and $11,000 in other pay. So they got a total of $130-some thousand for that year. And because, let's say they worked for 30 years and they worked as a police officer, because police officers get a higher pension calculation, then that officer would get $99,000 as an annual pension. And also they get a 2% raise or a cost of living increase every year on top of that. So all state workers get that 2% increase every year as well. So this is a big problem in our plan. It's susceptible to this pension spiking. So our plan has some problems. It has flashy promises somewhat. It has pension spiking issues. The plans also lack portability. So if you work for the state and then you choose not to work for the state, you can't take your plan with you. You just have to leave it with the state and then maybe start a new plan somewhere else. So that's a problem. And also, it takes 10 years to be vested in the current plan. So if let's say you work for 9 years for the state, well, if you leave employment, you don't get any of the contributions that the state made on your behalf. You have to just forego all that money. And that's for someone who worked for 9 years. So that's a problem because a lot of millennials and other people are job hopping. And this plan doesn't serve them in that respect. So, well, what can we do, and what do other states do when it comes to pension plans? Excuse me. Well, it turns out that there's all these different types of plans. There's defined benefit plans, defined contribution plans, hybrid plans, cash balance plans, and choice-based plans. These are all plans that are being explored. And if you have this paper, those of you, if you turn to page, let's see, where is it? Page 16. Then, and if you need some more, there might be some on some other tables, or you can share. If you turn to page 16, you'll see that we've listed out, and I had to go through every single plan and look at it. We've listed out every state and what types of plans that they have. Many states have, well, all states have defined benefit plans. Many states have defined contribution plans. And there's other plans. You can see Hawaii is one of the states that just has one type of plan, just the defined benefit type of plan. So you can see that other states are trying many, many different things to mitigate the costs. So let's go through some of those. If you want to go into great detail, you can read the report, but this is just an overview. Let's talk about defined benefit plans. Obviously, we already said defined benefit plans have some problems in them. But there are some defined benefit plans that work. Wisconsin is a defined benefit plan, and it's 99% funded, which is amazing for us to see in our research. How did Wisconsin do it? How did they get a DB plan to be almost 100% funded? Wisconsin is the #1 highest funded plan in the country right now. So how did they do it? Well, first they dialed down on promises. They didn't make promises that they couldn't keep. That's number one. They also have these different mechanisms that they used in Wisconsin. For example, instead of a 2% annual cost of living increase, they say, here's your minimum level of benefit every year. And if the stock market crashes or we get investments that are too low, you still get that minimum benefit. But if there's a windfall in the stock market, let's say we get higher than expected earnings, then we'll give you some of that windfall. And so that helps mitigate against some risk. They also have adjustable contribution rates. It's more flexible. Here in Hawaii, we always have to go to the legislature every time we want to change contribution rates, but they can do it every year. They also do that. Remember that Hawaii constitutional thing I was talking about where you can change benefits for future service? Well, they do that. And they cap benefits at 65% of pay for most employees. So that helps stop pension spiking. You don't see these huge pensions there. So that's Wisconsin, and South Dakota also does all those things. And by the way, South Dakota is the second highest pension plan funding in the nation at 97%. Okay, so what about defined contribution plans? Well, let's see. Does everyone here know what a defined benefit plan is? I think I talked about that. You get benefits based on how many years you worked and how much your salary was. That's your benefit, and it's disconnected from how much money is in the system. Defined contribution plans, on the other hand, you get money based on how much you contributed. So first the plan says, okay, how much did you contribute? Then it says, how much can we afford to pay you from the plan? And it matches costs going out with costs, or with money going in, and it keeps the plan solvent. So defined benefit plans are often at almost no chance of unfunded liability in that sense. And there's 34 states that offer those plans. In fact, a lot of states use these types of plans for professors, for university professors, because they're really portable, actually. It turns out a lot of them have vesting on day one, and you can take them, if you leave your job, you can take it with you. And also, some plans have it as the main plan. Alaska and Oklahoma, they said these are our main plans in these states. So we also have hybrid plans. I'm not going to go through the very deep. You can ask more about these, but hybrid is basically, it's a mix. You've got a defined benefit, you've got a defined contribution, you put them together and you call it a hybrid plan, and it's just somewhere in the middle. Same thing with a cash balance plan. It's a defined benefit plan that's calculated like a defined contribution plan. You just kind of put them together and it's in the middle. So a lot of states have these other types of plans. And then you've got a choice-based plans, is the last plan here. And the choice-based plan works like this. Let's say we're going to put everybody in a defined contribution plan. But we're going to give them a choice. If they want to, they can choose to opt into a defined benefit plan within 70 days or within a year or something like that. So there's a lot of states that do that as well. So what are the best practices that we uncovered in our pension study? Well, number one, a lot of states have different types of pension plans, not just one. And so that is a best practice that we found for mitigating costs and serving employees better, is to offer one of these plans. Another best practice is to cap benefits at reasonable levels to protect against pension spiking. Now, how would that work in Hawaii? Well, unless you did a constitutional change, you would have to honor all pension spiking for years going into the past, but there's still an open question about whether you would have to honor pension spiking for years going forward if some clarifying legislation were passed. And that does need to be clarified, either through a lawsuit or a constitutional convention or something. It's an open question. Right now, nobody knows what we can do with that. Also, instead of a cost of living increase, we found that the Wisconsin thing, where you could just keep it at a minimum level and get windfalls, that is a best practice. And also, it's a best practice to use accurate assumptions, don't just rely on the 7% return rate, but also look at 6% and 5% and risk-free rates of return. So what are the next steps then, now that we know this information? Well, number one, we need to perhaps calculate the cost of new plans and new mechanisms. Someone needs to calculate those costs, and it requires an actuary to actually see, okay, let's say we tried a hybrid plan. What would that actually cost the state? So that's number one. Number two is we need to resolve the constitutional issues that I brought up earlier. Can we adjust benefits for current workers for years going forward? And finally, just implement some of these cost-saving measures. So that is the presentation, and I hope I didn't talk over your heads, but thank you so much. Yeah.
Do I need a small microphone? Didn't Joe do a great job of putting that together?
Thank you. Thank you.
Now, we would like to invite you to be part of the conversation. If you'd like to ask a question or make a comment, would you join me up here? Because again, we are recording and broadcasting. We need you to come up to the microphone and we'll give it to you. And just make your way up, form a line over here. And as you're doing that, Joe and I will chat just a moment. Feel free to join the conversation. In fact, the conversation is what we're trying to create. As you see, we didn't present a single silver bullet plan. Actually, we have silver bullet plans. We have a drawer full of them that any politicians in power can take out and actually use as a blueprint. But we didn't think that's what's appropriate at this stage. At this stage, we need to encourage the public, policymakers, as well as incoming new candidates who are running for office and incumbents as well, to find a piece of this to champion. And I should let you know that although Grassroot Institute is a 501c3 nonprofit educational organization, and we don't get involved in candidate politics, we actually do meet with a great number of candidates from all the parties privately for one purpose, just to share details of our research. And I make that offer to any of you or any of your favorite candidates. Without being partisan, we can sit down and discuss tax policy or ERS policy or anything else and give you the latest research and policy recommendations. But feel free to come on up, and I think we've stunned you if you don't have anybody coming up for questions. And as you come up, just stand here for a moment. And Joe, you just did a great job. All right, if you stand off to the side here. Tina, go ahead.
Okay, so Joe, I just want a clarification on that. When you did the research on the constitutional language, and you went back and saw what they were speaking about, are you saying we're not following that directive, or are we just taking the actual verbiage right out of the Constitution? So could you clarify that, because you said it needed changes?
Yeah.
Thank you, Tina.
Well, I think what it is people may have missed the intent of that article in the Constitution. So we may be misinterpreting that, absolutely, and that needs to be clarified.
The real debate is over whether or not what is in the Constitution can be altered. And many people argue that no matter what, the current structure is protected by the existing Constitution. All we're doing is raising the question and suggesting that this may be a matter for the courts to settle. There may be some flexibility there, short of having an actual constitutional convention as an option this election. Sir, tell us your name. Bill.
Bill Crockett. Joe, as I read the underlying statutes that create the important DRS, the statute seems to me to indicate a unitary organization. When I discuss this matter of unfunded liabilities with elected officials, they seem to treat the plan as a segmented plan that is, for example, the county of Maui is responsible for the unfunded liabilities for the Maui County employees. And one elected official told me once that, for example, if the city and county of Honolulu went into bankruptcy, Detroit, that in fact the state would act like a guarantor for the unfunded liabilities of the city and county employees, so that the county of Maui would not have any responsibility to make good those unfunded liabilities. Could you comment on that?
Yeah.
Thank you, Bill.
Okay, so that's a great question. Hawaii has, remember this constitutional law that protects benefits? That's known as the California Rule, and it protects benefits. There's 10 other states that have that. I can't remember off the top of my head what those 10 states are, but other states that have those provisions have actually, when they have gone bankrupt, when municipalities have gone bankrupt within those systems, they actually retooled some of it. So for example, in Detroit, it came to them cutting benefits. They cut $1 billion worth of benefits for the employees. Now your question is, well, wouldn't the state bail that problem out? And technically, yes, the state would be required to pay the benefits first. In the Constitution, it's written that the benefits have to be paid before anything else, actually. So they'd have to put that money towards the paying off the benefits first, and then put the money towards paying off other things. So, but if in emergency situations, like in California, they're facing some emergencies when it comes to this question, this question actually is getting thrown into the courts in a few states, and they're trying to wrestle about whether or not in an emergency they can cut benefits. So it's still in the courts as an open question nationally, and we've never dealt with that question here, but it's a good question.
Part of this is semantic. There's the claim that the Constitution guarantees that employees retired from the state system will be paid. But perhaps there's a better word than guarantees. It prioritizes. In other words, it means that they get paid first before other things get paid. I like this illustration. Think of the Titanic sinking. Which floor are you on? First, second, or third? Well, the state employee retirement system guarantees that its employees will be on the third floor. But if the whole ship is sinking, there just won't be the resources to handle the situation. Any other questions or comments? Come on, please. Hugh?
Thank you very much, Joe. Appreciate it. I'm wondering, for having been self-employed for 50 years, I'm a little unfamiliar with the subject. For new employees, government employees, how have the pension plans been changed to address some of these shortfalls? And my second question is on the spiking. One on the outside here is about a certain amount of gaming of the system, so to speak. How many years of overtime and other income that you outlined does it take to skew the pension benefits? And then the last question, if I may, what's the politics of this? So how do the labor unions factor in with the legislature, factor in with the law, just the politics?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Q. I'll let Joe think that through. We might get to 2 out of 3 of your questions. In the meantime, I'll say something. Again, this is personal. I don't represent the Office of Hawaiian Affairs or any government agency now. But based upon what you're saying, in terms of the changes the state has made toward new employees in the state, and now I'm technically an employee to some extent, I would have to run for 3 terms in office in order to be vested, because they're 4-year terms. And so that's too long for the public to be looking at my face. But in reality, for those starting their careers, one of the biggest problems that we're facing is that we have a brain drain of millennials out of Hawaii who are going elsewhere to work and not in the government sector. And one of the reasons they don't want to work in the government sector is because they have to be vested for 10 years in order to benefit from the retirement system. Today's work process has changed significantly. On average, a millennial may have 35 different jobs before he or she dies.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's see. The first question was about how have benefits changed. So in 2011 and 2012, the legislature changed the plan. And they said that we're going to dial down benefits for everyone. It used to be 2% for a lot of plans. Now it's 1.25%, that little multiplier that they multiply by. So benefits have gotten less for new workers since 2011 and 2012. And also, they fixed the pension spiking issue already in 2012. They fixed that issue, but only for new workers going forward. It still can be applied to current workers going forward. So you could say that they fixed, a lot of the times when you ask them about this problem, they'll say, we fixed the problem, but the problem persists with current workers still. So, as far as the politics go, maybe I shouldn't have waded into that question. But, I think that a lot of union members, and I talk to a lot of union members who are concerned. They see, especially millennials my age, are looking at a pension fund that's offering them less benefits. They have to pay more and more contributions into it. And they also have to pay as taxpayers, by the way, because let's not forget that union members are taxpayers. So they are concerned about this problem, and they don't want to see a fund that's half funded or almost empty. So I think union members themselves have incentive to try to reform the system, as they have in other states. So.
Okay. I'd like to echo what Joe says there. We spent a lot of time talking to union workers about this. And reforming the employee retirement system is a great opportunity for union leadership to get in touch with members. Members live in the real world. They pay the same cost of living, and they have the same concerns as everyone else. There's another issue we talked about in this room a couple of years ago, and that was the fact that Maui Hospital here began to close some of its clinics. And that was first brought to my attention by some of you in this room who were contributing financially to keep the clinics open for the poor. And basically we did the analysis that showed that the system of the state hospitals is bankrupt, and that Maui's hospitals were paying over 75% on union salaries and work-related fees coming out of collective bargaining. So we put forth a model in which the unfeasibility was seen. Some of our biggest fans at that time in bringing about the public-private partnership of the 3 Maui state hospitals, some of our biggest fans were union workers whose jobs ultimately got saved when there was a switch. And so we're not in any way suggesting that an anti-union approach be taken toward the reform of the ERS, but just the recognition that it's in the best interests of the unions and union leadership to be in touch with the needs of its workers. And we think that's the area in which political advance can be made. Jeremiah.
Thank you. First, I want to really thank both of you for talking about the big elephant in the room, and that is the pension spiking, which we're all aware, I think, what's going on in that. So I have 2 questions. My first question is, what do we have to do to get someone to wake up, to change the pension so that doesn't happen? My first question. The second question was, when I saw the graph where it showed that the assumption was if they got a 7% return, that essentially in 2008, 9 or something like that. First of all, when I used to sell investments, and I told a client, I give you 7% return, they're like, oh my God, how much risk is that, right? My question about this is, does this take in account an expansion of government, in other words, hiring more employees? And also the fact that, I'm a single dad, and my salary is very humble, and it's hard to live here because of the cost of living. Does that number also include the assumed increase in salaries? So those are my 2 questions.
I'll let Joe mull over some of the technicalities there and address the issue of the pension spiking program. Why does pension spiking take place? Our earlier research showed one aspect, and I repeat, that's just one aspect of this. It made breaking news when we reported that much pension spiking is taking place because people know how to game the system. They know how to calculate what their increased pension would be if they had higher amounts of overtime during their careers. And definitely, we had agency personnel from different agencies and so forth admitting that a good deal of pension spiking takes place as gaming the system. But I want to be on record making it very clear that that's not where the majority of pension spiking takes place. The majority of pension spiking takes place because of the way the system is built, not because anybody is trying to game the system. I was on the Big Island recently, and I spoke with the Assistant Fire Department Chief. He commands 130 firefighters, and he pointed out that now during the eruptions of Kilauea some of his workers are working 90-hour weeks. And he told me that, yes, he knows that's going to affect their pensions. But believe me, that's not why they're working the 90-hour weeks. These are valiant state workers and county workers, but the system is built in such a way that we as taxpayers are going to pay a permanent increase in their pensions because of that. I spoke with Tom Williams, head of the ERS, and he put it this way. What's going on the Big Island and on Kauai in terms of the disasters and the need for increased public workers to be working overtime, it gives him some concern. It's like a major spike in the stock market, and he wants to factor that in somehow. The main thing is this, it's unknowable. It's unknowable until we actually see the actual effects. So we have to have a systemic change to the system. Joe?
Right, so that overtime calculation on the Big Island, for example, that was not included in this, I can guarantee you. But what was included in this calculation, that's a good question. The ERS right now, its figures are very hard to get when it comes to that kind of question, although they've been transparent on other things. But the assumed rate of return and these assumptions can be double-checked, though. And I actually called the Reason Foundation on the mainland, and they actually double-check the numbers for pension systems. And sometimes they point out, well, actually, you're forgetting to include this cost and that cost and so on. So they've actually proposed, oh, maybe they should do that here. And so we're kind of in talks with them about that. But one thing about this this investment thing I want to talk about is it's getting riskier and riskier to make high returns on the stock market. They used to be able to say, okay, we're going to make 7% returns by just buying all bonds. We'll just buy bonds and we can just hit 7% every year. Now, the stock market is getting more and more risky, and you have to incur more risk just to try to hit that 7% return as an assumption. So there really is no guarantee that we're going to get that 7%.
Well, thank you. We have time for a couple more comments. If we rush up here, and we'll be able to let you know we need you to come on.
Oh, yeah.
Sure. We'll bring the microphone over to you in just a minute. Okay.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Peter.
Thanks, Joe, for being here. I think there's another elephant in this room. In private enterprise, one of your biggest expenses is having employees. The state and the county have a lot of employees. Is there a loop here? Is there more than you need? Can you ever not fire, can you ever call back on the amount of employees that you have for the state or the county? And the second question, give us an argument for and against having a constitutional convention.
Well, I'll just let your first comment stand as it is. Yes, the government employs a high number of personnel. In fact, the employment rate of federal, state, and county and city workers, along with what we spend in the government sector, in Hawaii exceeds the private sector. And that's a staggering result. We're not talking about a radical free market in need of having a radical free market, but we are promoting a bigger private sector here. Okay, CONCOM. Well, we'll think about that, but we'd like our friend over here to be able to ask his question.
I have one response though to that public-private thing. By the way, is we have something in Hawaii called the Kono decision, which this is another very wonky topic. But the Kono decision prevents what you're talking about of doing public-private partnerships and things. It serves as a barrier to that. So if you want to talk about that, you can talk to me after. So go ahead.
Ori, go ahead.
I'm sorry if you know this. I've been living in Maui 25 years. How many state employees do we have?
Oh.
I don't know.
I mean, how big is this problem? I mean, I see the graph.
We'll have to research that for you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Can we get the microphone back? We'll close. Thank you.
Oops. Yeah, I'm not sure how many state employees. I know it's about 10% of the state that is in the public pension system, but I'm not sure exactly how much that is.
Thank you.
10% of employees or 10% of the population?
Of the population of the state, yeah.
Well, everyone, have you had an informative time today? Has this been useful? We left one dangling question. question, so I'll answer it really briefly. Con-con or no con-con? A con-con could result in long-term issues like the ones we talked about today in terms of rewriting the constitutional law with respect to the employee retirement system. And you may have a few other things that you'd like to see done. But on the other hand, the con-con could also tamper with important institutions and structures that were set in place in 1978. And one last factor, a con-con would be wonderful if we were like the idealistic ancient Athenian Greeks who would sit around and have public discourse and a high level of reason and logic. Until Hawaii has that kind of public discourse, the con-con could be very dangerous. With that said, we don't take a position one way or the other, but we are your Grassroot Institute. Thank you so much for being with us